us to do.
Yes.
I mean, we're not watching the video that does. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was pretty nice.
Yes. Yes. How you doing there?
Oh, good.
Good to have you here tonight.
Thank you.
Shall we get started here?
Okay, Lord, you give your church pastors, teachers, and all those who preach and teach the good news of your Son, Jesus Christ. As your word is proclaimed, give them boldness and faithfulness, that they may have joy in their work. Forgive us for our failure to hear your word and live according to it. By your Spirit, produce in us, by that word, fruit that is pleasing to you. On this Thursday evening, we are reminded of how you gave your Holy Supper to your church. Even as you gathered your first disciples to your table, so gather us and feed us the fruit of your passion, that we may enjoy the eternal life you have prepared for us. Amen.
Amen.
Yes, we know.
Okay, we have some interesting sayings.
Oh, discipline. Hey.
Discipline. Oh no.
Yeah. Oh, no. You don't have to be disciplined. Nope.
Oh boy, son of a gun.
Oh, did I hit that
Boy,
button?
this one here, it's the nail around, and I'll be son of a gun. The page I open it to. Here we go. Whatever it may be, sports, pleasure, business, money, or family, when put first, that is your God. Bingo. The most miserable Christians are those who cannot reconcile their creed with their greed.
Your mommy come tonight or no?
I guess, as far as I know. As far as I know. See where she's at. I'll find out here in a sec.
In a tracking tool?
Yeah. I keep a good eye on Mom.
All right. Don't smoke in bed. The ashes that fall on the floor may be your own.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh my.
Especially that spontaneous
Yes.
human combustion thing going
Don't
on.
smoke in bed. The rest of your days depends on the rest of your nights.
Yep.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
You can pick anything. You can pick anything.
Anything out of the book.
Anything in the book. Whatever in the book. Mark it off when you're done.
Well, I know somebody's wife wrote this.
And there's some of those in there.
Man doesn't plan to fail, he just fails to plan.
That's a good
I've
one.
always said, I'm not 6 months behind, I got everything planned ahead 6 months.
There you go.
That's good. That's a good one.
Ah, Tom, you're
Yes. Oh my.
Thank you. I'm the best one.
Yes. Yeah, the husbands are all regretting saying, well, when I'm home, when I have time off from work, I can do this. And they've been off work for the last 6 months.
Yes, sir, I tell you, I retired at the end of March
Yes.
after 42 years
You
working. 5 jobs, 2 jobs.
Yes.
That like this evening, I just said, you know what, I'm done. I'm done.
Yes.
That's
good.
it.
Yeah,
I'm
good for
going to
you.
town, I'm gonna relax a little bit.
Yeah.
Good for you.
He's a retiree of PHB up there. My brother
Oh, I know.
works.
Yeah.
You worked at PHB?
42 years.
My brother's been there 36,
It was
going on
Parker White when I
37.
first started.
I don't remember which my cousins were, but one was Dave Force Spring, the other one's Kevin Jordan. And I'm
They
trying to,
might be in the machining division.
okay.
The names are familiar.
Dave was in the administration or something. Kevin was still working there. Laid off, come back, laid off. Come back.
I just dropped in there earlier in the week for a few minutes. Just pulled into the loading dock to say hi to everybody. Oh, Johnny Hilbert thinks the world of you. He says, you get a hold of him and he'll hire you back in a heartbeat. No. Lead tool.
One of his favorite pastimes when you're riding in the cars, he would say, I want you to make a fraction out of 0.35792. You know, he would just do this fraction and the decimal stuff. I'm like, stop it.
Yeah, they're all permanently seated
Yeah.
into my brain, you know.
Yeah, I just
It's
made
not
that.
7/16, it's 4/37.
That's right, that's right. That's what he would-
3/16, 187.5.
Yeah,
Uh,
it was fun. Really, car rides were real fun.
Okay, kind words do not wear out the tongue. That, there's a shortage of kind words these
Okay,
days.
I get to pick anything?
Anything you want, yes, any,
354. I'm back. Okay, I did.
okay. So, our good friend Rick, he's got to get up extra early tomorrow morning, so he was concerned he'd be here too late tonight.
Oh, okay.
So he's not here, and
That boy needs to toughen up.
you know, fine.
Yeah, I must have tired him out.
Oh my, oh my. All right. So we'll touch on a few things. Today I was listening to a seminar on the Constitution, since today is it's Constitution Day, and these were professors and teachers and authors on matters regarding the Constitution, and they were discussing this whole matter of the Constitution and what the emergency orders were, and then they were discussing the Constitution and the upcoming election, and so it was both of those were very interesting, not necessarily, you know, discussion of the Bible, but discussion of the whole matter of the emergency orders and how different states have different provisions for the governor to have emergency orders, and the intent was always it would be short term, and so some of the discussion had to do with this long term, this continual enforcement and carrying on and furthering of the emergency order, which was never intended to be anything of this length. They did say that many states had a provision that in case of some kind of serious sickness or something, that would be a reason to do this. While at the same time, they were discussing also the Constitution and the whole matter of infringing upon free speech. It was interesting. They said, well, if you have free speech, you ought to also, there's somebody to listen there, which means you have to gather together. So, you know, as if they could shut everything down and one person could stand out in the field and talk to themselves. So they were talking about the implications and the consequences of Constitution. Then they were talking about churches and the various states interfering with people having worship services and questioning that. One of the interesting things they talked about, it, they didn't elaborate enough, but they talked about the fact that the right to own property, and the implication was not only that you could buy a piece of property, but the right to have property was also involved the use of the property and to derive your income from property. And, unfortunately, and have the right to own property. But then part of that was your right to use your property. And if you have a business that, in a sense, that part of that was to be able to earn money and keep the property. So that was quite interesting.
What was this on?
This was an online seminar through Claremont Institute out west, and they had a professor from Hillsdale College
There you go.
talking, and he was quite vocal. On the one hand, you have the right to these emergency orders, but at the same time, other people have to take the responsibility, like the legislature, and at some point limit or respond to things that are not constitutional. And so it was quite fascinating to hear the discussion, the ins and outs and the back and forth about the Constitution and what people have a right to do and what they don't have a right to do. So that was quite fascinating.
Over here, we have a good judge just shot down Evil Wolf's orders,
Yes.
and now everything is open up in Pennsylvania. Majority voted against, and one judge took that down for whatever all the people voted for. One judge.
Yes.
That should never happen. People voted for this thing against the homosexual stuff, and then one judge goes and throws a monkey wrench in it. That's crap.
Now pedophilia is starting to show its ugly face.
Well,
You know,
now they've diminished the punishment for pedophilia in California. They're cutting away at
I
it.
recall when a lot of people that objected to this, like gay marriages and it was pushed and promoted, exposed. You couldn't watch a sitcom without having some kind of
Yes.
perverseness or whatever. People were scoffed at when they said that eventually it would lead to pedophilia.
Yep, exactly. Goes right down
Mhm.
there. Yep, that's sick.
I'm interested. I've always been interested in history and constitutional
Oh, yes.
powers. The struggle since the mid 1800s with centralized government brings to mind like owning property, actually owning your own land,
Yes.
deriving a living from your property. A lot of people fled to America because they didn't have that in
Right.
Europe.
Right.
And one thing that I got, and I never actually read anything that referred to this specifically, but one day I was curious about, it's like everybody, is, oh, you're a conservative, oh, you're a liberal. Well, the only association that I could recall was listen to William F. Buckley when I was a kid.
Oh, yeah.
He was a liberal, but he was like a cool guy, he's intellectual and stuff. Well, no, they classified him as a liberal back then. He'd probably be classified as a conservative now. So I researched liberalism, and I stumbled on a term that they call classic liberalism.
Yes.
And it was like laws based on God's law, small
Government. Yes.
freedom of movement, freedom of speech, freedom of your religious preference and stuff like that. It's like, oh my
yes.
gosh. I says, I've never read any correlation between this and our founding. Based our Constitution on.
The sickening part is I've got a neighbor, okay, he's of, I guess, Slovak, whatever descent. And he has to know that his ancestors, our ancestors came over from the old country to escape that crap, like you're saying, so you could own this and that. He owns a lot of farmland, Dick Pavoco. And he's doggone supporting Biden. I think are you kidding me? These people are nuts. They're nuts. They have no idea. They forgot about what their ancestors came from. Then they want to go back to, go back to the old country then. If that's what you want, go to, these communist countries. If that's what you want. get out of here and go back. It drives me insane.
They forget. They forget the way things were in other places and other times, and
They're stuck on Roosevelt. They're stuck on Roosevelt. They can't get Roosevelt out of their thick heads. Because that was that big thing. Oh, Roosevelt saved us and that and the other. Well, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But you know, this is not Roosevelt's party. Period. Nowhere even near it. And they're just stuck on that. They will not get off of that. No way, no how.
it's
just
a long
scary.
history. Because liberalism was at one time, once these things got established, and others tried to take away those freedoms. And so those people who sought to conserve, to keep holding on to the freedoms, a conservative is someone who holds on to something. A conservative is one who knows the value of these things that are established. And so then the liberals then became. So then it's the 40s and the 50s where these reactions against the, if you will, the liberalism that became conservatism reared its ugly head, and it no doubt goes back to socialist and communist influence coming into the United States in the first 50 years, where communism was infiltrating, coming into our society, and Roosevelt himself bought into some of this stuff.
I have, in my treasures, I have, from the voting,
Yes,
the big paper thing with the levers on there,
yes,
and there's people on there from the Communist Party in the 50s.
yes,
Boy,
It's not, I mean, it didn't just present itself with Gus Hall back in when did Nixon run? 1968?
68, yes.
68. Gus Hall ran as
Oh, sure.
on the Communist Party.
you
I mean,
gotta-
it was before that. It was even post. What surprised me when I found these, that it was post World War II,
Yes,
and I could see the Communist Party being active prior to World War II. But in the United States after World War II, in the 50s, it seems like that if you wouldn't want to identify with the Communist Party, period.
Yes.
They can do it better. They know the mistakes that were made, so they can do it better.
Yeah.
Just like
So-
the socialists.
Venezuela, they're recent, they didn't do it. They destroyed a huge economy that was going bananas. I mean, it was just, they were rocking cheap gas and they had it made in shade. They
Probably did sell bananas.
had oil out the wazoo. And they
So some of
ruined it all.
the things that came about in the 50s, 60s, and 70s were part of this new liberalism, rejecting much of the values, the freedom. You had numerous things. All of these things happened in the 60s, so it's not as though suddenly it wasn't a switch that was flicked. It was a movement that was going on, and where you saw it was in the 50s in particular, when there was all this concern about communism in the movie industry, and McCarthy,
God bless him. God bless him.
McCarthy trying to bring attention to it, and then they made him look like, the worst kind of a person that ever lived. But those things were going on, and then there were the and everybody said no, that didn't happen. And then in recent years, it comes out that yes, indeed, they were guilty and they did this. So in the 40s and the 50s, you had people adopting these kinds of things, in the 50s, you had a change where a different view and teaching. And so you have all of these things, and then all of these things start appearing in the 60s and 70s, and we're now reaping the harvest of all of these things.
Well, the free love and this and that and the other.
It was more than just a loosening of morals. It was a slow adoption of a whole different view on society and government and freedom.
In the 30s, my parents were really struggling. Things were pretty tough.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Dad worked in the steel mill. And people get into communism is you see people like that are really, they're poor.
Yes.
And they make all kinds of promises and tell them, how good it's going to be if you, join the party. And my parents got into it. They didn't know. They didn't know what it was. I know Mom was telling me about this.
Yes.
So I think that's one of the things that the communists or the liberals do. You're struggling and they make you promises.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to
The
leave.
reason you're going without is because I have all this.
Yes.
And that makes me the bad guy. I remember Mrs. Kansi talking about when Hitler rose to power, that everybody thought he was the best thing because people were suffering.
Yeah.
Yes.
there it is.
He was at first. At
We
first
beat
he
him
was.
down. We beat him down after World War I. The whole society was suffering, and she said that before they realized what he was really about, it was too late.
I think that happens more than what we want to believe.
Yeah,
They get the
happens all over.
struggling people. And for a long time, and this was true for a while, the Democrat Party was for the working man. But they lost their way someplace. They lost their way. But I think there's a lot of people still hanging on to that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
They can't, they're so blinded. That's the scary part. They're so blinded, that they can't see Donald Trump, or what they did. They're so blind. They have that hate, and they don't give a darn. Like you said, if Donald Trump cured cancer tomorrow, they'd hate his guts. They'd still hate his guts.
Pastor, where do you ever really thought where you're going to see the church, like in 10 years or 20 years or 5 years?
Well, there's a lot of people are saying a lot of things because this shutdown has really shaken the churches, and they are on the one hand, you're exposing what people think about church and what they're doing at church, and so those that don't have a good view of what is happening in the sanctuary meet in the sanctuary or not. There's a very popular evangelical who said, we're not meeting in the church until next year sometime. And he just, this is he would have 1,000 or more. So the one question is, what is the church doing? So you have those that view the getting people together as a time to persuade people to a certain kind of action. They are suffering terribly because they can't get together, and it's kind of breaking apart their view of what they do when they get together. So you have if people are just getting together because they want to get together, and somebody's going to get up in front of them and try to persuade them to be nice to their wife and follow Jesus, What's the difference between doing that in a building or doing that over the internet? So you have these people saying, um, um, something to the effect that explaining how churches can move beyond merely digitally extending current practices towards digitally transforming how they do ministry using digital technologies to create new practices. In other words, how we do church doesn't matter, but if we do it over the internet, we can do that just as well as if we were in a building together.
That's not true.
All
Now,
right,
you see,
No way.
now, so then you have this subject that we touched on last week. See, the question is, what happens when people come into a building for a particular service? Is that something that is simply by human voluntary will? Because many people view it as, there's God and there's religion, but when people gather together, it's all voluntary. So those churches are really struggling, and they're talking about literally going online now, because if that's where people are finding the religion, then we'll go online. And they're literally, I watched a seminar today on what do you do when you're online. So anyways, so then you see, at the end of last week, we got onto one of my little shticks, and the question is, what do we do when we get together here on Sunday morning? And so we have a different take on it, and it has sort of guided me in what we're doing, even when in all of these things. So some of my fellow pastors, some of my fellow pastors decided that they could celebrate communion online, going to the digital online thing, and so the pastor would be by himself and say the words of communion, and the people at home would have their bread and wine, and they would eat it at home. Okay, so in other words, just skip the whole. We could spend about 2 hours talking about why that's wrong. But you see, these truths and these practices have no real meaning, but we'll just make it up and do it differently now that now that people can't come to church. So early on, I think it was March or April, there was a guy who came on, and he's advising people about what to do when churches can't get together like they have been. And so the first thing he suggested was cut up the different parts of what you do on Sunday. So one day you play some songs, another day you have the prayers, and another day you have a short message.
it's cuckoo. I don't care.
Because in many of those places you come together and they work you into a certain way of thinking, and then they hit you with what they want to do. See, and then they ask for money to keep doing it. So what is our view of things? Our view is that it is God who established gathering his people together. and we looked at the Old Testament, how God told Moses, he takes him up on the mountain and literally is showing him heaven. He says, okay, here, what I want you to do is I want you to set things up this way, and then I will come down and everybody will gather around me. And that was the tabernacle and later the temple. And so when the tabernacle was built and when the temple was built, God would come and he would dwell in the tabernacle, and then the service would take place, and then God would come and bless his people. So
I'm telling you, they're gonna kill the church. They're
So-
purposely, before this is, instead of challenging the dead blasted government and saying, oh, no, we're gonna have church. And I'm disappointed in doggone President Harris and all. We should all be getting together with all these other churches, good ones, and say, no, we are having church. I don't care what state. We're having church. But yet, we're gonna capitulate, we're gonna listen to the dang government, and let them push us around and not have church.
Wait, you're saying the president of our Senate?
Apparently he's not pushing the Missouri Synod churches to open up. Defy the government, start opening up, do what you gotta do.
they haven't, that's another discussion. So then you see God comes down to earth in Jesus Christ, and he takes on human flesh and he gathers his people together. So in the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Christian church, God comes down and he gathers his people together. That's what you see in the scripture. And so then it's about people getting together for the service with God. And he says, what we're doing here is with Christ now, and what we're doing here is as though we are coming into the tabernacle itself in the service, and we're actually coming into the very presence of God. So people from the time of Pentecost had the understand God comes down, he gathers people together, and even when the Christians still gather together. So there is a divine work calling people to faith, gathering together, and having someone who speaks on his behalf. And what happens in the Christian service, in our service, is that we are coming into the presence of God. The shape of the sanctuary is similar to the tabernacle, and so then as we go through the service, we are being brought into the presence of God, and then we have the holy meal up at the front of the church, where Christ brings us literally into heaven itself. That's why in the church we come up to the communion rail. You're going up and literally going into the Holy of Holies, eating the bread and drinking the wine at the body and blood of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So the church is not a human institution. It's something established by God, by his word, by his spirit, and pastors are called to speak on his behalf. And so the church is going to continue so long as people continue to understand this divine divine reality that is here on earth, and people are gathered together. What Christians were not prepared to do was to gather illegally. Christians took it for granted. We are following the law. We are there was no discussion about what would happen if the government wouldn't let us come into the sanctuary. And what happened was when this all came down, the churches, they had everything was shut down. And so the churches shut down. And even MacArthur,
It's a straight line like this.
so the other Mike,
You retired guys, I'll tell you.
they just, so the Christians, you see, even MacArthur out in California, his church shut down. So the Christians were not prepared and ready to worship illegally, to go against the government, because all of this time, the churches thought they had the freedom of religion, the freedom of assembly, that there was a separation of church and state, and that the state would not step in and interfere with the Sunday